All right, so today on this video, we're going to look at the organs of the lymphatic system. Again, these are slides 14 through 22 on the PowerPoints that are posted on D2L. So lymphatic tissue and lymphatic organ, two different things. And in this one, we're really going to concentrate mainly on the lymphatic organ. So lymphatic tissue contains several cell types, including lymphocytes and macrophages. So now lymphocytes and macrophages. Lymphocytes, in just a little bit, and some of the videos in this chapter, we're going to learn that their B and T cells are lymphocytes. And again, they're called lymphocytes, which is telling you they're associated with the lymphatic system. That's why they're going to congregate here. The other one that says here are macrophages. Now remember, a macrophage is a monocyte, right? And when it's in the circulatory system, it is a monocyte. Once it leaves, it becomes a macrophage, a big eater. That's what macrophage means. So both of these, if you're paying attention, these are the two agranulocytes. The two agranulocytes seem to be the things that are all about this lymphatic system. Now, the two types of lymphatic stuff, I'll just say, is either, as we say here, tissues or organs. Now, lymphatic tissues, the difference between lymphatic tissues and lymphatic organs is that if you look down here, the first thing on lymphatic organs is they consist of encapsulated lymphatic tissue. Lymphatic organs have a capsule where lymphatic tissue does not. That's the main difference. Now this lymphatic tissue up here, we call it MALT, M-A-L-T, mucus-associated lymphoid tissue. Mucus-associated lymphatic or lymphoid tissue. It is uncapsulated, and as it says, it's going to be associated with areas that produce mucus. And this is the respiratory tract, the digestive tract, and urinary and reproductive tracts. Now, we already know fairly well or heard the name of one type. It's called tonsils. Tonsils are going to be found in the pharynx, and we're going to look at those, and especially in the lab part of this. But the tonsils are uncapsulated, and they are little areas of lymphatic tissues, lymphatic nodules, where these cells, lymphocytes and macrophages, hang out. So is the appendix. We used to think the appendix was what they would call a vestigial organ. It isn't used anymore, but that's so not true. We found out that it is a very important part of your immune system in the digestive tract. And so it used to be that anytime that someone had surgery in the abdominal pelvic area, if it was open, they would automatically take out the appendix. Now they don't do that as much because we found that it is a very important part. And then this other one is called Pryor's patches. The only thing I want you to know about the Pryor's patches is it is about the small intestine, and they are particularly the last part of the small intestine, which is called the ileum. And so Pryor's patches are about the small intestines, in particular the last part called the ileum. So we're going to look at it a little bit in this chapter, but mainly in the digestive system when we look at this alimentary canal and look at the small intestines. So in this, we're looking at the lymphatic organs, and there's really three. Lymph nodes, which is a whole category of little organs, the thymus, and the spleen. So there's three. So the first one we look at is the lymph node. So the lymph node, if you've ever had these little raised sore little bumps, either on your neck or in your arm or whatever, these are little areas of lymph nodes. There's common areas, inguinal, cervical, like I said, in the neck, axillary. But if you have an infection, they will become inflamed, swollen, and painful. They're very small. If you feel underneath your chin, if you get a sore throat, those are not lymph nodes. What you're feeling are your tonsils, but we'll talk about that more again when we look at those tonsils in lab. So what's going on are these are little cleaning stations. They're along the pathway of the lymphatic vessels. And what's going to happen is you will have more of the lymphatic vessels coming in, called afferent, than you do lymphatic vessels that are leaving, and they're called efferent. And so this is one way how these small capillaries, these millions and millions of small capillaries, start merging together into fewer and fewer vessels. So these little cleaning stations, called lymph nodes, filter pathogens from lymph. All right, filter invaders from this fluid. So I've got the fluid that's leaving the tissues, the leftover fluid from that little cycle of the capillary, and that pressure keeps increasing until it pushes this fluid in through those trap doors on the capillaries, the lymphatic capillaries. Now this fluid is called lymph. As it goes through, it's going to go through one of these little cleaning stations. And as it goes through this cleaning station, there's going to be T, B, and macrophages, T cells, B cells, and macrophages that are sitting there and monitoring. And then if there's some sort of invader, it will attack it. So it attacks viruses, bacteria, parasitic cells. So anything that gets in there is trying to do us harm. The macrophages, these big eaters, they're there to engulf and destroy the foreign substances that are flowing through. Even in areas of damaged cells, you will feel, if you have a cut on your arm, you will, like if I have, this is the shoulder, this is my hand as I try and draw it here, right? So this is where my elbow is, we'll say, and then go up, right? So the axillary region here is there. Let's say I have a cut down here next to my hand. I'm going to have these lymphatic capillaries that are going up through here, and there's two areas that they're going to pass. One is called the supratrochlear, or in the elbow, but the largest group is going to be in this axillary area here. And so it's real common to feel swollen and sore little lymph nodes in this area, because as the cut is being cleaned and it's being filtered, I'm going to have damaged and dead cells that are going through there, cellular debris, but I'm also going to have bacteria that's trying to get in there, hopefully not, but possibly viruses, all kinds of stuff. So you'll feel it as it's fighting for you. Now, as you go in through you follow the lymph flow, what's going to happen is there's these little rooms, and it basically moves through here and gets filtered. Again, these little germinal clusters are where B cells are. They're the ones we're going to learn. They produce antibodies. T cells are the ones that actually go in through and fight, cell to cell. And they're going to be found all through here, along with their buddies, the macrophages. And so this fluid goes through, it gets filtered, and then finally it leaves and it, merges in. And so on this one, we've got two afferent cells divided up into four parts, and then they're only going to have one efferent vessel. So this is how it kind of moves through, filters, but also streamlines. So these are areas where the lymph nodes are going to be found. There's definitely, they're all over the body except for in the central nervous system. But throughout the body you're going to find them. But they usually will gather in clusters. And most of these regions, I hope, are just familiar. Cervical region, again, this is the cervical region. So in the neck, axillary region, right? The axillary lymph node. The axillary region is in an area that we would call the armpit. The supratrochlear region that we just said, the supratrochlear region is in the elbow. All right. Inguinal region, we had talked about how there was an inguinal line when we were naming the blood vessels. Right? We said the inguinal line's right through here. This is another area, the inguinal region. The pelvic region is going to be a little internal, but in the pelvic region, obviously, abdominal cavity, abdominal lymph nodes, and then finally the thoracic cavity, we're going to have thoracic lymph nodes. Hopefully those all just make sense. Now, the two primary functions of lymph nodes, again, filter potentially harmful particles from the lymph, and it's just a surveillance system. It is monitoring the body fluids to know if we're under attack or not. So this is a big deal. So along with red bone marrow, the lymph nodes are centers for lymphocyte production. Now, this can be a little confusing, and let me see if I can explain this. T and B cells. Before I get to that, I'm going to say T and B cells. That's what these two things are here. All of the blood cells, right? So we've got erythrocytes or red blood cells, leukocytes, all 5 of them, or white blood cells, and then platelets or thrombocytes, right? All of them are produced in red bone marrow. T lymphocytes, while they're created in the red bone marrow, they leave early on, well before they are mature, and they go to mature in the thymus. That's why they're called T cells. But they're created in the red bone marrow. All of these are created in the red bone marrow. Now, when T and B cells, which B cells stay in the bone marrow and mature, I wish that was the reason they were called B cells. We'll look at that in a minute. But T and B cells, when they're in a lymph node, all right, so let's say I've got a lymph node and I've got, these are afferent capillaries coming in. I'm going to try and draw it to where I've got, one coming out, right? So as they go through here and the lymph is filtered, if in this lymph fluid I see a bacteria that's up to no good, I am going to have memory T and B cells that are in here that will see it and start replicating. It's called cloning. They make clones of themselves. And so there is a lymphocyte production, but they're not original. It's important to understand all of the originals start off in red bone marrow. And so I don't want that to get confusing. I can replicate, they'll just make clones of themselves in the lymph nodes and the lymphatic organs. However, they're not original. So there's 2 ways to look at that, and I hope that makes sense. This is one of the things where I hate I wish I could see your face as you're following, so I could see if you're following me. But this can be a confusing statement. All blood cells are birthed in red bone marrow. I can make clones of the lymphocytes, T and B cells, in the lymph node. All right. Lymphocytes attack various pathogens in the lymph nodes. They are looking for, and it says various, but they are looking for specific ones that they are tuned into. Macrophages engulf and digest foreign substances and their damaged cell debris. They're just getting rid of anything. They're like little bulldozers. Now, the thymus is a really weird lymphatic organ. It's in the mediastinum. It's this little guy right here. And it's odd because it seems to get smaller as you age. Now, before and it actually does, but before it does, what happens first is it just doesn't grow as fast as we do. So you start off as this little baby, right? I'm going to draw, babies have this big melon head. I should have drawn it like that, right? Babies are interesting, it's how big a baby's head is. It's like a little baby bird now. Well, I guess that's what it is. My cursor won't let me draw it for whatever reason. But anyway, when the baby is born, the thymus is like this, and as they grow, and babies grow very quickly, the thymus doesn't grow as much, so it seems like it shrinks. But in all actuality, once you become an adult, it does start atrophying. But this is where T cells, in particular, and why they're called T cells, go to become mature. It is a very interesting place. It's like the college of T cells. They go into become educated on how to fight things. Now, thymosins are the hormones that stimulate the thymus to cause the T cells to mature. So, you know, you're young. Again, as you get older, this doesn't work as well. So I'm approaching 50, so I can't really say it's going to do as much with me. But let's say you're 18. When you come in contact with something that your body is looking to fight, there's going to be a release of this hormone that's going to go to the thymus, and it's going to make sure that T cells are produced and matured, finished their educational process, so to speak, to get out to help you fight. As it says here, this is what we talked about: large in infancy and early childhood, but it starts to shrink at puberty. And you can see, like, this is a little baby, how big the thymus is compared to the mediastinum. And then we've got it in an adult. Now, again, if I was to look at this and then measure the two without looking at all the structures around it, it probably would be that this hasn't shrunk a whole lot. It's just that everything else got so much bigger. But as you start aging, it starts being replaced, the tissues of it start being replaced with adipose and other connective tissue stuff. And again, it's always about use it or lose it. Our immune system does not do well in a super sterile environment. Everything in our body needs exercise, needs strengthening. Use it or lose it. And that's a big thing. A lot of people want to be too sanitary. Be very careful. Now, I'm not talking about going and playing in sewage water or whatever, but I'm just saying be very careful about being too sterile. It can have adverse reactions that you don't even realize. Moving on. The spleen. Now, the spleen this is definitely something I want you to know. It's the largest lymphatic organ. The spleen is the largest lymphatic organ. It is in the upper left abdominal cavity. All right, in the upper right, we have the liver. The upper left is the spleen. It's important to know that. It's good landmarks to know. We do need to know that it is, like I said, the largest lymphatic organ, and it resembles a lymph node, oddly enough. It is going to have venous sinuses filled with blood. This spleen, the largest lymphatic organ, is basically a lymph node for blood. And it says it down here at the bottom. Filters blood like lymph nodes filter lymph. And it's going to have two types of tissue. And people get this always messed up. It's got white pulp and red pulp. Now, do not worry about what they look like. I'm going to point to the bottom here. These little areas, and they're a little bit white, are areas of white pulp. White pulp is not really truly named for the color of the pulp. It's named for the type of cell found there. Lymphocytes, or said another way, white blood cells, are found in white pulp. That's why they're called white pulp, because there are white blood cells, particularly lymphocytes. Red pulp is called red pulp because it is mainly red blood cells by far. Now, it is also going to have lymphocytes and macrophages in it, but it is by far red blood cells. So I've got white pulp, which is pretty much white blood cells all by themselves, particularly the lymphocytes, and red pulp, which is mainly red blood cells. That's how you know the difference between the two. That's what I should say, is the difference between the two. This lists the three major lymphatic organs, lymph nodes, thymus, and spleen. Lymph nodes are found along chains and paths of the larger lymphatic vessels. Again, this is filtering and merging everything. This is where macrophages are looking to destroy anything that comes through there. And both T and B cells are there to help monitor. The thymus is where the T lymphocytes are going to be matured. And then the spleen, the basic thing about the spleen is know that it is basically a lymph node for blood. And in it, I'm going to have both macrophages and lymphocytes. And I'm going to have two types of areas there, red pulp and white pulp. White pulp is where the where I say the lymphocytes are going to be found. Red pulp is where the red blood cells are going to be found. The spleen is the largest lymphatic organ, and it is found in the upper left portion of the abdominal cavity. All right, so those are the lymphatic organs.